The Prisoner of Darkness. The room was dark. The walls were cold metal, covered in scratches from those who had been here before. A single red light blinked in the corner, casting long shadows across the floor. The air smelled of oil, blood, and something worse. Fear. Lyra sat in the middle of the small cell, her back resting against the cold wall. Her arms were wrapped around her legs, pulling them close to her chest. Her body ached from the countless days of torture. Burns, bruises, deep cuts. She had stopped counting how many wounds she had. Her once smooth, silver-blue skin was now covered in scars. The Zarkans had taken her from her home, dragging her to this place like an animal. They were a warrior race, cruel and heartless. They did not ask questions. They did not show mercy. They only knew pain and suffering. She had lost all sense of time in this prison. There was no sun, no stars, only the never-ending darkness. The only way she knew time was passing was through the visits of the Zarkan guards. They came in groups, their red eyes glowing in the dim light. Their sharp claws clicked against the metal floor as they stepped closer. They never spoke, only growled. They experimented on her, electrocuted her, cut into her skin to see how fast she healed. They wanted to know everything about her kind. And when she was too weak to scream, they laughed. She had tried to fight in the beginning. She had tried to resist. But now, she was tired. Too tired. Tonight was the same. The guards had left her alone after another session of torture. Her body refused to move. Even breathing felt like a struggle. Then, something changed. A deep, rumbling sound shook the walls. The floor beneath her vibrated. At first, she thought it was just another nightmare. But then, the sound grew louder. Explosions. A warning siren blared outside. Red lights flashed as the ship's alarms activated. Heavy footsteps ran past her cell door. The Zarkans were shouting in their guttural language. Something was happening. Something big. Lyra barely lifted her head, her mind clouded with exhaustion. But then, through the thick metal walls, she heard something strange. A voice. Not a Zarkan voice. A human voice. The words were muffled, but she could tell. She had heard stories about humans before. The warriors of Earth, the only species in the galaxy that the Zarkans feared. The only species that had ever stood against them. She forced herself to sit up. Her body screamed in protest, but she ignored the pain. If humans were here, it meant something was wrong. Something different. Boom. The door to her cell exploded inwards. Smoke and fire filled the room, blinding her for a moment. She coughed, struggling to see through the haze. And then she saw him. A figure stood in the doorway, his silhouette sharp against the fire behind him. His body was covered in battle armor, scratched and dented from combat. A large rifle was slung over his shoulder. His helmet covered most of his face, but his eyes were visible, cold, calculating, human. He stepped forward, scanning the room. His gaze landed on Lyra. For a second, he hesitated. Then his voice cut through the noise. "I'm getting you out of here." She stared at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. Was this another trick? Another cruel experiment? The human took another step closer, lowering his weapon. His expression softened slightly. "Can you walk?" Lyra tried to move. Pain shot through her legs, and she collapsed back to the floor. She was too weak. The human sighed. Then, without another word, he knelt down and picked her up. She gasped, startled by the sudden warmth of his body against hers. He was strong. Even through his armor, she could feel the power in his arms. "Hold on," he muttered. And then, they moved. The human carried her through the burning hallways, dodging falling debris and dead bodies. The Zarkans were everywhere, their monstrous forms blocking the corridors. But the human was fast. He fired his weapon with precision, dropping enemies before they could react. Lyra clung to him, her mind spinning. Who was he? Why was he saving her? Another explosion rocked the ship. The human's grip tightened around her. "We don't have much time." Lyra looked back at the prison she had been trapped in for so long, the place of her nightmares, the place that had almost killed her. Now it was burning. And for the first time in forever, she felt something strange. Escape or death. Smoke filled the air, thick and suffocating. The sounds of gunfire and explosions echoed through the corridors of the Zarkan warship. The once quiet prison was now a battlefield. Ethan Vale, the human soldier who had just broken into one of the most secure Zarkan ships in the fleet, held Lyra tightly in his arms. His boots pounded against the metal floor as he moved quickly, weaving through the burning wreckage. The weight of the alien girl in his arms was nothing compared to the adrenaline pumping through his veins. "Stay with me," he muttered under his breath, though he wasn't sure if she even heard him. Lyra's body was weak. She barely had the strength to keep her eyes open, but she felt the warmth of the human's arms. It was different. The Zarkans had only brought her pain, cold steel, sharp claws, endless suffering. But this human, he was warm, strong, and for some reason, he was risking his life to save her. A deep roar filled the hallway behind them. Ethan spun around just in time to see a Zarkan warrior charging toward them, his massive claws raised. The alien's thick, plated armor gleamed under the red emergency lights. Its fangs were bared, its eyes glowing with fury. Ethan didn't hesitate. He raised his plasma rifle with one hand, aiming over Lyra's shoulder. One shot, clean and precise. The Zarkan let out a choked growl before collapsing to the floor. A smoking hole burned through its skull. Ethan exhaled sharply. Damn, they don't stop coming. More shouts echoed down the hall. He turned, pushing forward. Every second counted. The fight through the warship. The corridors of the warship were long, twisting mazes of metal and darkness. The Zarkans had designed their ships to be prisons as much as war machines. Each passage led deeper into the heart of the beast. Ethan navigated the hallways with precision, his mind running on pure muscle memory. He had studied the Zarkan warship schematics before the mission. He knew there was only one way out, the hangar bay. But they weren't alone. As he turned a corner, 3 Zarkan soldiers emerged, blocking the path. Their claws gleamed, their armor thick like natural exoskeletons. One of them snarled in their guttural language. "Surrender the girl, human, and we will give you a quick death." Ethan smirked. "I prefer the slow kind." Without setting Lyra down, he fired 3 rapid shots. The first 2 Zarkans fell instantly, but the third one lunged, dodging the plasma round. Ethan gritted his teeth. His rifle was out of charge. The Zarkan warrior charged forward, massive and relentless. Ethan barely had time to react. He twisted his body, shifting Lyra to one arm while pulling a combat knife from his belt. The alien swiped at him. He ducked. Another attack. He sidestepped. And then, with brutal speed, Ethan plunged the blade into the Zarkan's throat. The creature let out a gurgling cry before collapsing. Ethan ripped the knife free, wiping the dark purple blood off his armor. He glanced at Lyra. She was barely conscious. Her breathing was shallow. "Just a little further," he promised. But he knew the truth. They were running out of time. The hangar bay, and the monster waiting for them. Ethan reached the final blast door. Beyond it was the hangar bay, where his stolen stealth fighter was waiting. Their escape was seconds away. But as he reached for the control panel, boom, the doors burst open from the other side. And standing there, blocking their only exit, was something worse than any Zarkan soldier. A Zarkan warlord. He was twice the size of any other Zarkan, his armor thick like a living fortress. His claws were sharpened to deadly points, and his deep red eyes locked onto Ethan with pure hatred. Human. The warlord's voice was deep, like thunder rolling through the sky. "You have made a mistake coming here." Ethan's grip tightened around his rifle. He knew who this was. The markings on the warlord's chest, the deep scars across his jaw. This was General Vorak, one of the most feared Zarkan commanders in the galaxy. And Ethan. He had just killed his men, burned through his ship, and stolen his prisoner. Lyra's breathing quickened. Even in her weakened state, she recognized Vorak. He was the one who had tortured her. Her body trembled against Ethan's chest. Vorak took a step forward, his massive clawed foot shaking the floor. "You will not leave this ship alive." Ethan took a slow breath. He could feel his heart pounding. He wasn't afraid. He was ready. He gently set Lyra down against the wall. She barely had the strength to lift her head, but she looked at him with tired, silver-blue eyes. "Don't die," she whispered. Ethan smirked, rolling his shoulders. "Not today." And then he charged. The duel for freedom. The fight that followed was brutal, fast, and deadly. Vorak struck first, a massive swipe that could have torn Ethan in half. He dodged just in time, rolling to the side. His plasma rifle was useless against the warlord's thick armor. This would be a fight of skill, not firepower. Ethan moved fast, his knife flashing as he aimed for weak spots. The joints, the exposed neck. But Vorak was faster than he looked. He blocked, countered, slammed Ethan into the ground. Pain shot through Ethan's ribs, but he didn't stop. He twisted, grabbing a loose metal pipe from the wreckage. As Vorak lunged, Ethan swung with all his strength, smashing the pipe across the warlord's face. The impact sent Vorak staggering. Ethan didn't waste a second. He jumped onto the warlord's back, driving his combat knife deep into the base of Vorak's skull. A terrible roar filled the hangar. Vorak collapsed to his knees, dark purple blood pooling beneath him. And then he was still. Ethan exhaled, standing up. His body ached, but he had won. He turned back to Lyra. She was staring at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. He walked over, scooping her back into his arms. "Told you," he muttered, breathing hard. "Not today." Without another word, he sprinted toward the stealth fighter. Behind them, the warship began to collapse. Alarms blared. Fires raged. And as Ethan launched the ship into space, the prison that had once held Lyra exploded into oblivion. She closed her eyes. For the first time in years, she was free. The duel against the warlord. The ship trembled, its structure groaning under the force of multiple explosions. Flames licked the steel corridors, casting flickering shadows against the walls. The once impenetrable Zarkan warship was now nothing more than a crumbling ruin, consumed by chaos. But for Ethan Vale, none of that mattered. His entire focus was locked on the towering monster in front of him, General Vorak, one of the deadliest warriors in the Zarkan Empire. The warlord stood nearly twice his height, his reptilian body covered in thick, plated armor. His claws, each one as sharp as a serrated blade, flexed eagerly. His deep red eyes glowed with pure, murderous intent. "You should have left while you had the chance, human," Vorak rumbled, his voice like a distant thunderstorm. Ethan smirked. "And let you keep torturing innocent people. Nah, that's not really my style." Vorak let out a low, menacing growl. "Then you will die here." The warlord lunged. His massive form moved with terrifying speed, his claws slicing through the air like a whirlwind of death. Ethan barely had time to react. He dodged to the side, rolling across the debris-covered floor as Vorak's claws tore through solid steel like paper. The sheer force of the attack sent a shockwave through the hangar. Sparks flew, and the floor beneath them cracked. Ethan sprang to his feet, gripping his combat knife tightly. His plasma rifle was useless. The warlord's armor was too thick for energy rounds. This fight was going to be brutal, up close, and personal. "Let's dance, ugly." A battle of speed versus power. Vorak roared and charged again, swinging his massive claws in a deadly arc. Ethan ducked just in time, feeling the wind rush past his face as the strike narrowly missed his head. He countered immediately, darting forward like a shadow and slashing his knife across Vorak's exposed side. The blade barely pierced the warlord's thick hide. Vorak snarled, spinning around with inhuman speed, his tail whipping out like a battering ram. Ethan had no time to dodge. The impact sent him flying backward, crashing against a pile of wreckage. Pain exploded through his ribs. He coughed, tasting blood. Vorak chuckled, stalking toward him. Is this all humanity has to offer? A weakling. Ethan wiped the blood from his lip. Buddy, I'm just getting warmed up. He pushed himself up, ignoring the screaming protests of his body. His mind was racing, analyzing every movement of his opponent. Vorak was strong, nearly invulnerable, but he was overconfident. That was his weakness. Ethan feigned stumbling, making himself look injured. Vorak took the bait, lunging forward, claws outstretched. At the last second, Ethan dropped to the ground, sliding between the warlord's legs. In one smooth motion, he plunged his knife into the soft tissue behind Vorak's knee. A deep guttural snarl of pain erupted from the warlord. Ethan grinned. Gotcha. But his victory was short-lived. Vorak, enraged, grabbed Ethan by the throat and lifted him off the ground. Ethan gasped, struggling against the iron grip. His vision blurred. I will break you, Vorak growled. Ethan felt the pressure tighten. His lungs burned. His strength was fading. And then, a weak voice cut through the chaos. Let him go. Lyra's stand. Vorak turned slightly, his grip still crushing Ethan's throat. Lyra stood at the edge of the battlefield, barely able to hold herself up. Her silver-blue skin was covered in bruises and scars, but her eyes burned with defiance. Ethan had saved her, fought for her. Now it was her turn. She raised a trembling hand, and something shifted in the air. The ship's gravity field flickered. For a moment, it seemed as if reality itself was bending. Vorak's eyes narrowed in confusion. Lyra's kind, the Aurelians, had once been known for their ability to manipulate energy fields. The Zarkans had tried to erase that part of her, torturing her until she had forgotten how to use it. But she remembered now. With a final, desperate push, she unleashed a pulse of energy. The shockwave slammed into Vorak, forcing him to release Ethan. The human dropped to the ground, gasping for breath. Vorak stumbled, momentarily dazed. Ethan didn't waste the opportunity. With every ounce of strength left in his body, he lunged forward and drove his knife straight into Vorak's throat. For a second, the warlord's red eyes widened in shock. He staggered, choking on his own blood. Then, with a final, strangled snarl, he collapsed. The warlord of the Zarkan Empire was dead. Escape before the fire. Ethan wiped his bloody knife on his sleeve and turned to Lyra. She was swaying, barely standing. He rushed forward, catching her before she could fall. She looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. Is it over? Ethan glanced around. The warship was falling apart. The alarms were deafening. Fire raged in the hangar, and debris was crashing down around them. Not yet, he said. He scooped her up and sprinted toward the stolen stealth fighter waiting at the edge of the hangar. The engines were already primed. Ethan jumped into the cockpit, strapping Lyra into the co-pilot's seat before taking the controls. As he activated the thrusters, a massive explosion ripped through the ship. The fighter shot out of the hangar just in time, soaring into the endless blackness of space. Behind them, the Zarkan warship erupted into a giant fireball, pieces of metal scattering like dying stars. Lyra watched in silence as the place of her nightmares vanished into oblivion. She turned to Ethan, her voice hoarse. Why did you save me? Ethan leaned back in his seat, exhaling, because nobody deserves to be left behind. Lyra blinked. For so long, she had believed no one would come for her, that she was nothing. But this human had changed that, for the first time in years. She felt free, and the galaxy would soon know the truth. The human's hidden mission. The stolen stealth fighter cut through the darkness of space like a ghost, gliding between the wreckage of the crumbling Zarkan warship. Inside the cockpit, Ethan Vale kept one hand steady on the controls, his sharp eyes scanning the monitors for any signs of pursuit. The explosion had been massive, and for now, the Zarkans were too busy scrambling to salvage what was left of their once mighty warship. But Ethan knew better than to celebrate. The Zarkans never forgot, and they never forgave. Beside him, Lyra sat in the co-pilot's seat, her silver-blue skin still covered in bruises and scars. She stared at the flickering lights on the console, her hands trembling as if the weight of freedom was too much to bear. For years, she had been trapped in a cage, tortured, experimented on, reduced to a test subject for the Zarkan Empire. Now she was here, inside a human warship, rescued by a man she barely knew. She turned to look at Ethan, studying his features. He had removed his helmet, revealing a rugged face marked by countless battles. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, his jaw covered in light stubble. His sharp green eyes were focused, but there was something else hidden behind them. Something deeper than just a soldier's resolve. She licked her dry lips before speaking. Why? Her voice was hoarse. Ethan didn't look at her. Why what? She swallowed, gathering the strength to say the words. Why did you save me? A long silence stretched between them. The soft hum of the ship's engines filled the void. Finally, Ethan sighed. Because you're important. Lyra frowned. Important? To who? The humans? The war? Ethan shook his head. No, important, the truth. She blinked in confusion. The truth. Ethan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. The entire galaxy thinks the Zarkans are just another species, strong, honorable warriors, a powerful empire that conquered their enemies fairly. But I know better. And so do you. Lyra clenched her fists, memories of screaming, pain, and darkness flashing through her mind. Ethan continued, his voice steady. The Zarkans are monsters. They don't fight wars. They commit genocide. They enslave weaker species. They experiment on prisoners like you. But no one believes it, because no one has ever seen proof. He turned his gaze toward her, his green eyes burning with intensity. Until now. Her breath caught in her throat. You need me as proof. Ethan nodded. I'm taking you to the Galactic Council. The evidence of what they did to you. Your scars. Your testimony. It's going to expose the Zarkans for what they really are. Lyra's chest tightened. The Galactic Council was the ruling authority of the universe, a massive coalition of alien races that kept order between the stars. If they heard her story, if they saw what the Zarkans had done, they would have no choice but to act. But something deep inside her whispered the truth. They won't believe me, she murmured. Ethan's jaw tightened. They will. I'll make sure of it. A dangerous road ahead. Ethan reached forward, flipping a few switches on the control panel. The ship's navigation screen lit up, displaying their destination. Nova Prime, the Galactic Council's capital station. Lyra studied the holographic map. The station was deep in neutral space, a massive city floating in the void. It was supposed to be a beacon of peace, a place where the laws of the galaxy were upheld. But she had spent too long in darkness to believe in fairy tales. What if they don't help? She asked. Ethan hesitated. For the first time since she had met him, he looked uncertain. Then we make them listen. Lyra's stomach twisted. She had seen how corrupt politicians could be. The Zarkans had power, influence. They had spent decades manipulating the council, making sure that their crimes stayed buried. What if the council refused to listen? What if the Zarkans got to them first? She shivered, wrapping her arms around herself. Ethan noticed. His voice softened. I know you're scared. Lyra let out a bitter laugh. Scared? I don't even know what it feels like to be safe anymore. Ethan was silent for a long moment. Then, finally, he said, I won't let them take you again. I promise. Lyra glanced at him, searching his face for any signs of deception. She found none. And for the first time in years, she wanted to believe. A new threat looms. Before she could say anything, The ship's alarm suddenly blared. Incoming ships detected. The onboard AI announced. Ethan's expression darkened. He turned back to the controls, bringing up the sensor display. Lyra's blood ran cold. A fleet of Zarkan warships had appeared on their radar, closing in fast. Ethan cursed. Damn it. They must have tracked us. Lyra's heart pounded. What do we do? Ethan's fingers flew across the controls. We can't outrun them in a straight fight. But I've got a trick up my sleeve. He yanked the throttle back, sending the ship into a sudden nosedive toward a nearby asteroid belt. Lyra gasped as the ship rocked violently, dodging massive chunks of rock and debris. The Zarkan fleet followed, their cannons firing. Explosions lit up the void, each shot missing them by inches. Hold on, Ethan shouted, spinning the ship into a rapid barrel roll. Lyra clenched her teeth, gripping the seat tightly as the G-forces threatened to tear her apart. But Ethan was in his element. He weaved through the asteroids like a ghost, slipping through the deadly terrain with impossible precision. Behind them, the Zarkan ships were not so lucky. Several of them collided with the floating rocks, exploding in fiery bursts. One of the remaining ships locked onto them, charging up a plasma torpedo. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. They're going to hit us. Ethan's hands moved fast. At the last second, he cut the ship's engines, sending them into a freefall. The plasma torpedo whizzed past, colliding with a massive asteroid instead. Boom! The shockwave sent their ship spiraling. Ethan re-engaged the thrusters, pulling them out of the tailspin just in time. Lyra's heart was pounding in her chest. The remaining Zarkan ships hesitated. They had already lost too many fighters in the chaos. And then, without warning, they turned and vanished into hyperspace. Lyra exhaled shakily. They're leaving. Ethan's expression was grim. No, they're regrouping. We just bought ourselves time. He reached forward, activating the hyperdrive. With a final flash of light, the ship jumped into the void, heading straight for Nova Prime. But Lyra knew the truth. The real battle was only just beginning. Betrayal in the Council. The Galactic Council's capital station, Nova Prime, hovered like a silent giant in the void. A marvel of engineering, it was a sprawling city of gleaming metal and glass, suspended in the darkness of space. Thousands of ships moved in and out of its docking bays, their lights twinkling like stars against the black. This was the beating heart of intergalactic politics, the place where laws were made, treaties were signed, and wars were either started or prevented. For Lyra, it was a place of hope and fear. She sat inside the stealth fighter's cockpit, her fingers clenched together. The closer they got to Nova Prime, the tighter the knot in her stomach became. "This is it," Ethan said, his voice calm but firm. "This is where we expose them." Lyra nodded, but doubt gnawed at her mind. Would the Council really listen? Would they even believe a former prisoner like her? Or had the Zarkans already silenced the truth? As Ethan guided the ship into one of the private docking bays, a voice crackled over the comms. "Unidentified vessel, you are entering Nova Prime's restricted airspace. State your purpose." Ethan pressed a button on the console. "This is Commander Ethan Vale of the Human Federation. I have urgent testimony regarding war crimes committed by the Zarkan Empire. Clearance code, Omega-7. A pause. Then, the voice returned, colder this time. "Clearance accepted. Docking Bay 12A is open. Proceed immediately." Ethan exchanged a glance with Lyra. "They're expecting us." Lyra's fingers dug into her seat. Was that a good thing? Or a trap? She took a slow breath. It didn't matter. The truth had to come out. The Council Chamber, a cold welcome. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council was massive, an open chamber lined with towering pillars of blue light, each representing a different member species. At the far end of the hall, 12 high-ranking officials sat in a semicircle behind a floating platform, and in the middle of it all stood Ethan and Lyra. Lyra felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her. The room was filled with politicians, advisors, and high-ranking officers from different star systems. Some watched in curiosity, others in suspicion. And then there were the Zarkan representatives. A group of Zarkan officials stood near the back of the hall, their reptilian faces carefully controlled. Lyra felt their piercing stares like daggers against her skin. One of them, Ambassador Krellis, stepped forward, his posture relaxed, but his eyes burned with hidden malice. "Ah, the brave human and his rescued pet," he said smoothly, his voice thick with amusement. "You bring quite the story, Commander Vale. I assume you have proof." Ethan didn't react to the insult. He simply stepped forward and placed a small data drive on the floating platform in front of the council. This drive contains everything: videos, images, medical reports, all documenting the Zarkan Empire's illegal experiments on sentient species, including Lyra. The room fell into silence. The lead counselor, a towering Selveni elder with crystalline skin, pressed a hand against the drive. The data streamed into the holographic displays above them. And then, the images appeared. Lyra's stomach twisted as the footage played. Videos of her in chains, the scars on her body, the cold, lifeless labs where the Zarkans had torn her apart and stitched her back together. A low murmur spread through the crowd. Some looked horrified. Others exchanged unreadable glances. And then Krellis laughed. A slow, deliberate chuckle. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Something funny. Krellis spread his clawed hands. Only that this entire show is quite predictable. Lyra stiffened. Predictable. Krellis turned to the council, his voice smooth as silk. "What we have here is nothing more than fabricated evidence. A desperate human soldier trying to turn the council against the Zarkan Empire. An old trick." Ethan took a step forward, his expression dark. "Are you saying this is fake?" Krellis's smile never wavered. "Of course. After all, who can verify this evidence? A wounded alien girl and a rogue human. The Zarkan Empire has always upheld peace. It is the humans who thirst for war." Gasps rippled through the chamber. Lyra's chest tightened. "He's lying." Krellis ignored her, turning to the council. "We demand this propaganda be dismissed immediately." The lead counselor raised a hand, silencing the crowd. He turned to Ethan. "Commander Vale, do you have any external verification of this evidence?" Ethan clenched his jaw. "The evidence speaks for itself." The counselors exchanged glances. Doubt crept into their faces. Lyra felt cold all over. They weren't going to believe them. And then, the doors to the chamber suddenly burst open. A squad of heavily armored guards stormed inside, their weapons raised. "Commander Ethan Vale, you are under arrest for conspiracy against the Galactic Council." Lyra's blood ran cold. She turned to Ethan, panic rising in her throat. "What's happening?" Ethan didn't move. His green eyes locked onto Krellis, who simply smirked. It had been a trap all along. The fall into darkness. The guards grabbed Ethan, slamming him to the ground before he could resist. Lyra tried to fight, but two of them held her back. "Wait, you can't do this," she screamed. "We're telling the truth." Krellis stepped forward, his expression cold and victorious. "No, little one. You're telling a story." Ethan struggled against his captors. "You think this will stop me? You think humanity will just roll over and accept this?" Krellis chuckled. "Oh, I know they won't. But by the time they react, it will be too late." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You were never meant to leave that ship, human. But now that you're here, we'll make sure your story never leaves this station." Lyra's heart pounded. They were silencing them, covering everything up. As the guards began dragging Ethan away, she felt something inside her snap. She had been helpless her entire life, but not anymore. She gritted her teeth, took a deep breath, and screamed. Her voice was not just a sound. It was power. The air trembled as a shockwave of raw energy erupted from her body, knocking the guards off their feet. Lights flickered. The very walls of the chamber shuddered. The crowd gasped. Lyra was not weak anymore. She turned to the council, her voice clear and unshaken. "You will listen to me." The room fell into silence. For the first time, the truth could no longer be ignored. The galaxy's rage. A moment of stunned silence filled the council chamber. The air crackled with residual energy from Lyra's outburst, her voice still echoing in the minds of those present. The towering pillars of light that symbolized each member species flickered, as if the very station itself had felt the force of her desperation. Then the whispers began. What was that? It's she. No, it can't be. She has power. The Aurelians lost that ability centuries ago. Lyra's breathing was heavy, her hands trembling at her sides, but she refused to back down. She had spent years in the shadows, silenced by fear and pain. But not anymore. Her silver-blue eyes burned as she looked at the council. I was a prisoner of the Zarkan Empire. I was tortured, used as an experiment. I have suffered in ways none of you can imagine. And now, you will listen to me. Ethan, still on his knees after the brutal takedown, smirked through a bloody lip. Now that's how you make a statement. The council members glanced at one another. Some looked wary, others intrigued. But before anyone could speak, Ambassador Kraulis stepped forward, slow and confident. Impressive. His voice was smooth as ever, but there was a new sharpness to his gaze. I must admit, I did not expect such theatrics. Lyra turned to him, her fists clenched. This isn't a performance. It's the truth. Kraulis chuckled. And yet, the truth, dear girl, is not decided by who shouts the loudest. It is decided by those in power. He turned to the council, his tone shifting into something more formal. What we have witnessed here is nothing more than a desperate act. This girl, this Aurelian, possesses abilities thought long lost to history. That alone raises many questions. Can we even trust what she says? Or is she something unnatural? Murmurs spread across the chamber. Ethan's eyes darkened. You're deflecting. Kraulis ignored him, his gaze sweeping over the assembled officials. And let us not forget, this so-called evidence comes from a rogue human soldier, one with a long history of defiance against intergalactic law. A man who has broken treaties, disobeyed orders, and is wanted for multiple violations of jurisdictional warfare. Lyra's stomach twisted. Ethan's fists tightened. That's funny coming from you, considering the Zarkans don't even follow laws to begin with. Kraulis smirked, turning away as if he had already won. The lead counselor, the towering Selvani elder, raised a hand to silence the chamber. His crystalline skin reflected the dim blue glow of the room. These are serious accusations. We cannot act on mere words alone. Lyra stepped forward, voice firm. Then let my body be the proof. At those words, a hush fell over the chamber. She took a deep breath, then slowly pulled back the torn fabric of her sleeves, revealing the deep scars that lined her arms. Old surgical marks, burn wounds, and jagged lacerations, the undeniable evidence of years of experimentation. Gasps filled the room. Even some of the more skeptical council members leaned forward in shock. Lyra turned slowly, letting everyone see. Do you think I did this to myself? The council chamber was silent. Ethan's voice was calm, but deadly as he spoke. This is what the Zarkans do to their prisoners. And they're not just doing it to Aurelians. They're doing it to anyone who isn't strong enough to fight back. The silence stretched on for another moment. Then, a single council member, a reptilian Drathorian, stood up from his seat. His piercing yellow eyes glowed under the chamber's lights. I have heard enough. He turned toward Kraulis, his voice like a razor's edge. Zarkan, is this how you uphold peace? Kraulis remained expressionless, though Lyra could see his claws twitch slightly. The Zarkan Empire does what is necessary to maintain order, he said smoothly. Some sacrifices must be made for the survival of. Enough lies. The Drethorian's fist slammed into the table. I motion for an immediate investigation into the Zarkan Empire's activities. If even half of what has been said today is true, then the Zarkans have violated the very foundation of this council's laws. A ripple of agreement spread through the chamber. Other council members exchanged glances, nodding to one another. Kralis's smirk finally faded. He had lost control of the narrative. But Lyra could see something else in his eyes now. Not fear, something worse. A quiet, controlled rage. And that's when it happened. The Zarkan counterstrike. Before the council could proceed, a new alarm blared through the station. A deep, robotic voice echoed across the chamber. Warning. Unauthorized ships. HVENTEREDNOVA prime airspace. Defensive systems compromised. Lyra's heart stopped. Ethan's eyes widened. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. The massive screens above the chamber flickered to life, showing the space outside the station. And there, emerging from hyperspace, was a Zarkan battle fleet. Not just a few warships, a full invasion force. Dozens of destroyers, battleships and carriers uncloaked, their weapons locking onto the station. Inside the chamber, panic erupted. Council members shouted. Guards scrambled into action. Sirens howled. Kralis turned back to Ethan and Lyra, his eyes gleaming with triumph. You never had a chance. Lyra felt sick. This had never been about winning the argument. Kralis had already planned for this. He had only delayed, knowing that the moment the council began to turn against the Zarkans, their forces would strike. And now, the entire council, including its leaders, its lawmakers, and its only hope for peace, were trapped inside a soon-to-be burning station. Ethan growled, grabbing Lyra's wrist. We need to get out of here. Now. She barely had time to react before the first blast hit. The entire council chamber shook violently as the Zarkan ships opened fire. Explosions erupted across the station, sending metal beams and glass crashing to the floor. Lyra was thrown backward, barely catching herself as fire and smoke filled the room. The Zarkans had declared war. And now it was fight or die. Revenge and redemption. The shockwave from the Zarkan attack sent cracks through the grand pillars of the council chamber. The once majestic hall, the very heart of intergalactic diplomacy, now trembled under the onslaught of relentless bombardment. Screams filled the air. Debris rained from above. The station's emergency systems flickered, struggling to maintain power. Lyra coughed, pushing herself up from the shattered floor. Smoke burned her lungs, but the fire inside her burned hotter. She had spent too long as a victim. She would not die here. Ethan pulled her to her feet, his grip firm despite the chaos around them. His sharp green eyes scanned the battlefield, calculating their next move. The Zarkans had played their hand. This wasn't just an attack. It was an execution. They hadn't come just to silence Lyra and Ethan. They had come to wipe out the entire council. And if they succeeded, there would be no one left to stop them. A galaxy in flames. The large holoscreens inside the chamber flickered, showing the unfolding destruction across Nova Prime. Zarkan shock troops had already landed in multiple sections of the station, cutting down security forces with ruthless precision. Their gunships hovered outside, firing at anything that moved. Diplomats, politicians, and ambassadors ran for their lives, their former arrogance shattered by the cold reality of war. And outside, in the vastness of space, the human Federation fleet was nowhere to be seen. The Zarkans had planned everything. Lyra's hands trembled as she watched the screens. They're killing everyone. Ethan clenched his fists. Not if we stop them. The battle for Nova Prime. The chamber doors exploded open. Zarkan warriors stormed inside, their crimson eyes glowing in the dim light. Their claws gleamed, their weapons charged with deadly energy. Ethan reacted instantly. He grabbed Lyra and dived behind the wreckage of a broken pillar just as plasma fire rained down on them. He turned, raising his stolen rifle, and returned fire with pinpoint accuracy. 1 shot. 2 shots. 3 Zarkans dropped to the floor. But more kept coming. "We're pinned down," Lyra shouted. Ethan smirked. "Oh, you're about to see something fun." He reached into his belt, pulling out a small detonator. With a flick of his thumb, he activated it. Boom! A hidden explosive, planted before they entered, detonated in the center of the chamber. The Zarkan warriors were thrown off their feet, giving Ethan and Lyra a chance to move. They sprinted toward the exit, the Council's last stand. As they ran through the station's corridors, they found what little resistance remained. A handful of Council guards and Allied soldiers were making a final stand in one of the central defense hubs, barricaded behind makeshift cover. Blaster fire lit up the hallways as the outnumbered defenders fought desperately to hold back the Zarkan advance. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Hold the line," he shouted, sliding behind cover and opening fire. A battered human officer turned, his expression filled with desperation and relief. "Commander Vale, you're alive." Ethan grinned. "Barely. What's the situation?" The officer ducked as plasma fire whizzed overhead. "Bad. Communications are jammed. The outer defenses are falling. If we don't get a signal out, this station is lost." Lyra's breath hitched. If the Council fell here, no one would ever know the truth. No one would stand against the Zarkans. She turned to Ethan, determination burning in her eyes. "We need to get to the command center." Ethan nodded. "Agreed. We send a distress call, rally the fleets, and turn the tide." The officer hesitated. "The command center is deep in enemy territory. You'll never make it through." Ethan smirked, checking the charge on his rifle. "I like those odds." The final charge. Ethan, Lyra, and a small team of survivors pushed through the burning corridors of Nova Prime. They fought like demons, moving from cover to cover, gunning down Zarkan elites at every turn. Lyra's power was growing. She could feel it surging inside her. The energy the Zarkans had tried to strip away now burned stronger than ever. When they reached the final security checkpoint, a massive Zarkan juggernaut blocked their path, a towering war machine of metal and flesh. Lyra stepped forward. She had spent years being afraid of the Zarkans. Not anymore. With a single gesture, she unleashed a wave of pure energy, slamming into the juggernaut with the force of a collapsing star. The creature screamed as its armor shattered, its body imploding under the force. The path was clear. Ethan gave her an impressed nod. "Remind me never to piss you off." She smirked. Too late for that. A signal to the stars. Inside the command center, Ethan hacked into the emergency beacon. Lyra watched as he typed rapidly, bypassing Zarkan firewalls. Finally, "Transmission active," the system announced. Ethan grabbed the comm. "This is Commander Ethan Vale to all human Federation forces. Nova Prime is under attack. I repeat, the Galactic Council is under attack. If you're receiving this, bring the entire damn fleet." A pause. Then, "Acknowledged. Reinforcements inbound. ETA, 5 minutes." Ethan grinned. Showtime. The arrival of the human fleet. The Zarkans had almost won. Their forces dominated the station, their warships blockading the escape routes. And then, hyperspace ruptured. Hundreds of human Federation warships emerged in a coordinated assault. Battlecruisers, destroyers, supercarriers the size of cities. And at the front, a single terrifying flagship loomed over them all. The Titan, humanity's most powerful warship. The tables had turned. The end of the Zarkan Empire. The battle was swift and brutal. Human warships ripped through the Zarkan fleet, their cannons tearing apart enemy hulls. The surviving Council forces rallied behind them, reclaiming the station inch by inch. And at the heart of it all, Ethan and Lyra led the final charge. Lyra faced Krallis one last time. "Your empire dies today," she whispered. Krallis sneered. "You think you've won." She smiled. No, I know I have. With a final surge of power, she ended him. A new beginning. The war was over. The Zarkan Empire, once thought invincible, had fallen. The truth had been exposed to the galaxy. The suffering, the crimes, the cruelty, none of it could be hidden anymore. And Lyra, she was finally free. As she stood beside Ethan, watching the remnants of the Zarkan fleet retreat into the abyss, she knew one thing for certain. The galaxy will never be the same. Ethan smirked. No, it won't. And that's a damn good thing. For the first time in her life, Lyra smiled. And somewhere, among the stars, a new future was waiting for them.